make your throne upon our praise. Here in this place, have your way. The moment that we see you, we are changed. Show us your glory, show us your glory. In wonder and surrender we fall down. Show us your glory, show us your glory.
Hello and welcome. My name is Pastor Dave. Thank you for joining us. We are starting off a new sermon series called To, the Audacity of Big Prayers. It'll make more sense as I explain it. So first thing I want to do is I just want to read you the story. So this is a look at 2 Kings 2, 6 through 15. And for the next month, we're going to kind of hover around this character of Elisha. And so he was a prophet, and he was the assistant to the prophet Elijah. So it gets confusing because there's an Elisha and Elijah. And there's just a couple letters of difference in their name, and they sound super similar. But one, Elijah, was first, and then God picked Elisha to be his assistant for a time, and then his replacement. And so we are looking at Elisha, the prophet who came after Elijah. Confused? All right. So 2 Kings 2, 6 through 15. Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, and he is Elisha, his assistant. And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took off his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took a hold of his garment and tore it in two. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Israel?" he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. The company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, "The spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha." And they went to meet him and bowed down to the ground before him. All right, so kind of a strange story, I get it. So who are these guys? Who are the prophets? Now, prophets were these people that God had picked to be his mouthpiece and communicate his message to the Israelites, sometimes to the people, to the king, sometimes other people, foreign leaders and kings. And so they're kind of God's mouthpiece. They were spirit-filled whistleblowers. They sometimes gave just direct messages, God saying, do this, don't do that. Sometimes they were correcting the kings who were acting wicked. That was we get that story a lot from the prophets, where they have to go to the king of Judah or Israel and correct them because they're not living obediently to God. And so these people have been called by God, given authority by God, and literally God speaks through them and conveys his messages. Sometimes they predicted future events. Sometimes they confronted and corrected past and current behaviors. They performed many signs and miracles, and they were kind of the superheroes of the Old Testament. And so these are the prophets, and you can read in the second half of the book of 1 Kings. You can read the stories of Elijah. And then in the first half of the book of 2 Kings, you can read the stories of Elisha. And pretty incredible stories And some of them you might be familiar with. Some of the stories, were kind of those Sunday school Bible superhero type stories that we grew up with, and pretty incredible stuff that God did through these people. And so these are the prophets. Now, Elijah and Elisha both lived in kind of the 800s, in that kind of general time span. And Elijah, his big nemesis was King Ahab and the queen Jezebel. And of course, Jezebel has become an infamous name for like people who are incredibly wicked. And so these are the people that these prophets had to confront, these people who were living incredibly evil, wicked lives, and the prophets would be sent by God to confront them and call them out on that. And Elisha, as a character, he's this incredible guy because how his story begins, he's this guy who just, when he is called, when he is tapped to serve, he doesn't really hesitate. And so you find that story in 1 Kings chapter 19. And Elijah is, being a prophet seems to be a pretty difficult life, right? So they were often in fear of their lives because they're confronting the king and telling the king that he's wicked and disobedient and he needs to change his ways and listen to the prophet. And so the prophets they get this target on their back. And Elijah, having been a prophet during the time of one of the most wicked kings and queen that they had in their history, he had a huge target on his back, and the Jezebel had actually, like, she was murdering all the prophets she could find. And so some of Elijah's peers actually had to hide. They were hidden in caves and stuff like that to survive. And it gets to be this point where you almost get this sense, and the Bible kind of alludes to it, where he's kind of the last of his kind. He is you think of I think of like Star Wars and how often there is the storyline with Luke and stuff like that as being kind of like one of the last Jedis and stuff. And Elijah is kind of like the last prophet. And so he's in this incredibly difficult time of his life where he is being hunted to be murdered, and he's constantly having to be on the guard for his life. And it's a pretty stressful time, and he reaches some points where he seems to really be struggling. He has some real emotional highs and lows, and I think he's lonely. He is called by God to this incredibly difficult task of being a prophet, and he's seen a lot of his peers. They are murdered, and the things that God is instructing him to do are just over the top hard to do. And so a lot is on his shoulders, and he has some real emotional low spots, and he's really crying out to God that he wants a different calling. He's like, this is too much. And so God tells him to go and pick his replacement, to send him to get the guy who he will train up and then replace him. And so he goes, and when he goes and he calls on Elisha. Elisha is like, that he finds him, and he's out plowing in his field, and so he's a farmer of some sort. I don't know, but he says, let me go, basically tell my parents goodbye. And he does, and then he slaughters the the ox that he's using to plow the field, and he takes the plow and he uses that to start a fire, and he butchers the ox and roasts it and feeds the village, and then follows after Elijah. And so then he gets to be witness to some really cool stuff, and him and Elijah They kind of partner together for a while, and then the time has come for Elisha to be taken up. We don't have all the details, but somewhere in the story, God has said, "Okay, Elisha, you have served, and I'm gonna bring you to heaven," essentially. And and it's kind of, it seems to be, as we read it in 2 Kings 2, it's kind of a known thing that Elisha is going to be called up to heaven. And so as the story unfolded, as we read, Elijah asks Elisha, what do you want before I go? What do you want? And Elisha's response it's incredible. I love it. He asks for double. He says, what you have, I want twice as much. Like he has the audacity to say, what you have, I want twice as much. Like Elisha is kind of that baller who it's not arrogance. It's this supreme confidence, like, what I have been witness to, the God who is working in you and what he's called me to do, I'm gonna do it, but I want twice as much as what you have. And so he asks for a double portion of the Spirit of God. He wanted to be used twice as much by God as what his mentor and his predecessor was. That's a bold ask. Like, he is not shy. He sees the work of God in his mentor, and he says, I want that, but I want it to a bigger degree. Like, I want to be twice as close to God as what you were. I want to be used twice as much. The miracles you performed, man, I want to do twice as many. I just want to be in the presence of God, and I want to be used by God, and I want to be used to a greater extent than what you were used to. And again, I don't think it's not an arrogance necessarily, but it is a very bold ask. Now, to be clear, when he asks for double, he is not asking for 2 Lamborghinis, right? That's not his ask. He's not saying, I want to have 2 Lamborghinis, right? Sometimes when we think about bold prayers and asking God for stuff, sometimes our mind goes to asking for the things that are kind of meaningless, that are kind of like cars and houses. Like, Elisha didn't ask for 2 mansions. He didn't ask for these things that are here today and gone tomorrow, that at the end of it are really not that important. He didn't ask for that stuff. So, and sometimes when we think of asking God for anything, our mind goes to that. Like, if we could ask God for anything, we would ask to be millionaires and to have 10 houses and 2 Lamborghinis. And that's not at all what's happening in this story. That is not what Elisha is asking for. He's asking to be used twice as much by God. That's a way different thing than asking for 2 Lamborghinis. Elisha, his mindset, like his drive, is the Spirit of God in you, Elijah. I want that to a greater extent. I want how God has used you. I want him to use me even more. Like, that is an incredible thing to ask for. So if you were Elisha, what would you ask for? Right? If you could ask God, because and really, like, it was Elijah saying, what will you have? What will you ask for? But he's really saying, what do you want God to do for you? So if you could ask God anything, if you were Elijah, what would you ask for? And I would encourage you to take a moment, think about that. What would you ask for? Maybe jot it down. What would you ask for? How do we ask? Who do we ask? Can we ask? Should we ask, right? There's all these questions. Like, Elisha in this story is just bold. I want a double portion. I want twice as much. So how do we do that? Who do we ask? Well, the how is like Elisha did. Just be bold. Like, we don't have to be shy around God. God knows our hearts already. We don't have to be shy because he is a big God. As a matter of fact, I think sometimes when we ask too little of God, it's almost like an insult to his character and power. Like he's God. Like if you were to run into a multi-billionaire, pick whatever guy, if it's the computer guy or the internet shopping guy, whatever it is, and you were to see them and you needed to borrow some money, would you ask for like, hey man, you got a couple, you have some change to spare? Or would you be like, you know what, this guy has got $100 billion, I don't know. I'm not going to ask for spare change, right? I know he can afford it. I'm gonna if my need was I have $1,000 medical bill, I'm not going to ask one of those guys for spare change. I'm gonna be like, you can have $1,000, right? Because you know they have it. You know they're good for it. You know it's within their means. And so sometimes when we ask God for too little, it's almost like we're not acknowledging that God has everything, that God is all powerful, that he's capable, right? So when Elisha asked for double, it's not shy, it's very bold, but he's also within the context of, man, I've seen God do incredible things, so I know God is capable. I know God is able to give me twice as much as what Elisha had. I know God is capable to work in me and through me to do twice as many miracles. And coincidentally, when we read the story of Elisha versus Elijah, we see that sort of thing happen. Like, and not everything in their story is recorded in Scripture, so it's hard to know exactly. But Elijah, the first guy, he does some incredible things, or some incredible miracles, and he raises people from the dead. He confronts the false prophets. He does some cool stuff. But then Elisha, seems like he does even more, right? And the Bible actually records more of Elisha's miracles, so we get the sense that he did more because the Bible records more. So how do we ask? Who do we ask? Can we ask? Should we ask? Well, how do we ask? We ask in prayer. Who do we ask? We ask God. Can we ask? Absolutely. Should we ask? Yes. We should be a bit like Elisha. So let's talk about that. So the thing I want to encourage you to start doing is start to pray big. Big prayers. I'm not talking about long, loud prayers. I'm talking bold prayers where you understand who you're asking. You're asking God, who is the God of the universe, created everything, owns everything, knows everything, and loves you. Right? Pray big. He's capable of answering your big prayers. Right? Don't be shy. 1 Chronicles 16:11 says, "Look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always." So you're not praying on behalf of your strength or your capability. You're praying on behalf of God's capability. So pray big, because he can do big, right? He created everything, he owns everything, and he loves you. He can do big, so pray big. The next thing that we find in this story that I think can be an encouraging thing is pray often. Right? Keep going. One of the things we see in both the lives of Elisha and Elijah is they are these guys who are following God, and they seem to always be circling back to God, back to God, back to God. All along the way, they're always in contact with God. Pray often. Romans 12:12 says, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer." And there's a lot of verses that talk about praying often, praying continually, always be in prayer, all this sort of stuff. And I picked this Romans verse just to highlight this idea of be faithful in prayer. Right? You have a need, you have something on your heart, you have something concerning you. There is this problem, this thing you're thankful for, whatever it is, be faithful in prayer. And that carries this meaning that we're just going to always be bringing these things to God, always be asking God. Be faithful in prayer. Keep going to him. Pray often. And the last thing I want to encourage you is pray from your heart. See, prayer is not this special language given to the eloquent. Prayer is not this thing that only people who really know God really well can speak the right words. Prayer is not some gift only given to pastors and public speakers or whatever. No, prayer is a heart language. Prayer is literally the heart language between you and God. Pray from your heart. God is not looking for you to use big words. He's not looking for you to sound eloquent or fancy. He wants to hear your heart. That's what he wants. So pray from your heart. You don't have to time yourself. You don't, okay, I got to pray for 1 hour and use fancy words and sound like I've, spent an hour studying my Bible. No, you don't need to do that. God is not looking for fancy long prayers. Now, if your heart is broken and this situation is just troubling you and you spend an hour pouring out your heart, that's what God wants. If you spend 10 minutes pouring out your heart, that's what God wants. He wants to hear from you because it's a relationship. How many of you guys choose your friend based on how eloquent they are? How many of you choose your friend based on how rehearsed your conversations with them sound? It's not what we do, and it's not what God does. Psalm 102, verse 1 and then verse 17 say, "Hear my prayer, Lord. Let my cry for help come to you. He will respond to the prayer of the destitute. He will not despise their plea." And this psalm has this picture of somebody praying from the heart. You feel the need. There is whatever the struggle, whatever the need, whatever the thing is that's on your heart, you pray from the heart, and God hears that and responds. So as we have looked at this story, this initial story of Elisha asking for 2, right? That's where he asked for 2. He asked for double. He asked for twice as much. As we look at this, I think some of the big lessons to take from that is that we can pray big. We should pray often, and we need to just pray from the heart. So what is your prayer today? Go and pray it.